All right. Good afternoon. So we are the only thing standing or sitting between you and drinks. But I promise you that this is going to be a very engaging panel. We had a lot of very interesting discussions as we prepared, so we are very much looking forward to sharing some of our thoughts with you. And please don't forget that you can put questions in the Braille app, and I will be getting them on this iPad. So with that, I would like to ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with Inessa.
Excellent. So those who haven't heard this morning presentation, I'm Inessa Levina, Global AML Advisory at MasterCard, oversee all of the elements of AML, sanctions, compliance globally, and manage a global team of professionals who together we monitor the tough waters of AML. So I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Thank you. My name is Brianna Jeter. I am a counsel senior manager at Wells Fargo, covering merchant services. In a prior role at Wells Fargo, I oversaw the legal department execution of a build of a state federal law inventory, which is a lot of fun, and which fed into our reg change and risk and control self-assessment process. And I'm excited to talk about reg change.
Hey, I'm Mark Gilman. I'm the General Counsel and VP of Compliance at Data Lake. We do what Garth was telling you that we do. I'm a litigator by training. I worked at Morgan Stanley for about 7 years, covering information management, both on the legal and compliance sides. And at Data Lake, I do everything from running our transactions to running internal audits to engaging with regulators. We've done about 325 plus regulatory interactions over the last 4.5 years. So looking forward to talking a little bit more about that.
Hi, I'm a Senior Vice President in the Cyber and Intelligence Solutions business at MasterCard, which some of you may be aware of. It's actually a fairly substantial business. But I head up a team called Risk and Compliance Services, and it's a relatively new team where we're looking at how can we add value for MasterCard's customers by helping them understand and manage their compliance-related risks, in addition to what we've more traditionally done in the fraud, identity, and cyber risk areas. I'm relatively new to the compliance space. I've been doing this for about a little over 2 years now, but I have 25 plus years in general risk management roles across various types of risk management.
All right, thank you very much. So with that, we're going to start with our panel questions. So we discussed a little about a lot of challenges due to the increase in regulatory actions and the volume and how that affects kind of our ability to do our work. What is the effect on resources? So Inessa, perhaps you could lead us off on that topic.
Sure. So earlier there was conversations, what are the future of AI? Are we going to lose jobs? So I think we need to think of this and embrace the change, because it's not that we're going to lose jobs. We're going to automate certain tasks, right? And those tasks should be viewed and presented to your senior management. And you have to be very vocal about it, of what is it that you've done to create space to maybe focus on strategy now. So all of these tasks and all of these programming that we've heard about today, all of these add-ons are going to create capacity for our compliance specialists. So think of, I don't know, in my day-to-day job, how many copy and paste tasks that I do on a daily basis, how many manual spreadsheets I have to populate or case management solutions I have to populate to document, right? Document this and that, or create manual searches for whatever risk is currently evolving. So we're looking to automate all of that. So once we automate and once it becomes easier for us, now we created that capacity. And that capacity, if you don't measure it right now, you should be very vocal about it and make sure that folks at the decision making are aware of that, because those are the dollars saved and your time saved that you can now dedicate to more productive items, like focusing on the strategy, focusing on maybe new and evolving reg that you need to analyze. So I'll pause here.
Yeah.
Father's Chairman.
Yeah, I would say that I think the biggest challenge is really there's a huge disconnect between theory and praxis. And I've literally in the last 24 months lived both sides of it. Now that I'm the lawyer for a business that is regulated, state and federal laws apply to merchant and network rules as well. But when we were building out our inventory and we were trying to think of all the things, and we included industry rules, and we talked about whether the requirement was actionable, and we looked at exemption, and we looked at preemption, and we built something really beautiful. But now on the side of having to use it, it's challenging. And I think it's challenging too because, you know, as state laws in particular, an example that's currently sort of impacting merchants is the guns and ammo MCC sort of disconnect, where there are 7 states that are saying you can't categorize merchant category codes for guns and ammo, and California, as of Tuesday, passed a law saying you must for transactions in California. So how do you make sense of that? How do you navigate that from a control environment, and sort of how do you operationalize that in that space where it's, you know, vastly different? I'm sure in 5 years it'll get resolved either through litigation or through a, you know, regulator saying we don't have to do this, or maybe the federal government will step in. But in the meantime, right, you run the risk of being out of compliance with a state that's very aggressive in their enforcement actions. Either way, because Texas is kind of leading the states saying you may not, it's a registry, you may not, and I mean, so now you're back to the Alamo. So I think that the theory of how we do reg change and getting more data and more information and having it faster isn't wrong, but it's how do we, I don't know that anyone has really solved the how do you use it and then cascade it in a timely manner so that the policies and procedures and controls that rely, right, we got to begin with the end in mind. It's not the laws for the law's sake. It's what do you do with the laws once you have them, and then what is the role of legal, what is the role of compliance, what is the role of the business, and how we implement.
Yeah, that's all, I think, super valuable. Where I come at this is kind of from that kind of regulatory conduit perspective. So a lot of what I do is talk to regulators in our particular space around digital communication. There's been $2.5 billion in fines levied over the last couple of years. So this is very, you know, top of mind for our customers, the people we speak with. So, you know, I think from a regulatory change perspective, I'm just trying to understand and kind of inform the regulators, hey, these are the technology changes that are happening out there in the real world. This is how firms want to use these various technologies, whether it's communication tools, collaboration tools, productivity tools. There's a host of different kind of applications that folks want to use. And I think where the kind of rubber meets the road, as I see it from that kind of responding to regulatory change perspective, is, you know, there are IT teams and compliance teams who want to get the most out of the platforms that they're using, right? We do an annual survey, and the last year's survey found that over 80% of firms are using anywhere from 2 to 6 different communication tools. And so enabling their folks to use every single feature of those tools without the users having to think about compliance or security, kind of baking that in at the kind of compliance oversight layer so that the, you know, employees can do what they do and do business is what we think a lot about. So kind of that you know, continuum from regulatory change, regulatory risk, fines, through to how do you kind of help organizations manage that better with sophisticated tools, as Garth was kind of describing, that really let kind of employees do what they need to do and get kind of technology out of the way in a way.
I agree with what everybody's been saying. Just the other thing I'd add is that technology is driving huge change in multiple ways that's affecting the space. Technology is driving whole new ways that people can communicate. That makes it much more complex to monitor and track what's going on in those channels. It's also creating whole new areas of regulation. Cyber, now crypto, AI is coming, and that technology change is also changing regulation in traditional areas of regulation, in payments and other areas. So to come back to what Inessa referred to earlier, there's going to be a lot more work to be done, and technology can help automate the less insightful, the less challenging work that humans really don't need to do, free up people to do the things that currently only people can do. And I think that's a are going to be really, really important to keep in mind. Companies, financial institutions try to keep running their compliance function the way they've done it in the past. They're going to get swamped by the volume.
But technology is the solution and the problem, right? Because
Exactly.
the technology is driving the
Exactly.
change and really the speed and the pace. Because if 20 years ago, if you had to pass a law and then literally publish it, I mean, imagine the implementation time on that. Now it's instant. And you see it coming, and the information is disseminated much more quickly. So I'm curious in the future if the expectation isn't that implementation periods almost become coterminous with publication of a new law, because you knew about it, because we talked about it, because it was everywhere. You had a lead time to get ready, and so you don't need 2 years because you knew about it. And so, but it's interesting. I mean, I believe that is the way forward. But in the meantime, it's the bog. It's what's pulling it. It's what's pulling us down.
One point I would add, because I totally agree there, is that there's an increase as well in kind of regulatory guidance, kind of more informal notices, guidances, best practice materials that also kind of muddy the waters there in terms of, hey, what are we trying to align to? Do we want to pick a kind of best global standard for everything? Do we want to take a state-by-state approach? So I think, especially in the areas of cyber and privacy and such, there's a lot of kind of patchwork out there of things that you have to keep top of mind and kind of have a strategic direction on, because if you don't, then you're probably going to get lost in the muddle of all those different requirements.
I'm also going to add one additional thing I forgot to mention. So we talked about silos in the first panel, and how in global financial institutions it's so difficult when you have multiple product teams, you have legal teams dedicated to each product, you have privacy, you have all these other departments. So I'll give you an example of where MasterCard have been very successful. On a quarterly basis, we have a meeting, where we share technology and share innovation and share our wins. And we measure all of the successes just to showcase what of the AI or what of the automation wins we've achieved in that particular quarter. We showcase the tools that we have to other folks in the organization. So with that, we're refining a vendor selection. So maybe we can all leverage some vendors in a particular space. I get to know about vendors that I have zero information about in the past. Sourcing folks may be having vendors that have AML components or sanctions components. They could leverage case management that we have. So we're trying to share, we're trying to integrate, and we're trying to refine all of the vendors that we have. So that's been extremely productive for us. So if you have the particular challenge, it's not the solution, but it's one of the components you should probably be measuring and educating and gathering information across your entire organization to one single truth.
Yeah, but in a reg change context, I think that's actually can be really challenging, because the business may have the view that we don't do this in that way. This doesn't apply to us. And compliance may have the view, oh, it does apply. And legal is absolutely going to say, 9 times out of 10, if they interpret it like, well, it could apply to you. And so then it becomes, well, whose voice matters, right? How do we then come to like a final resting place about what the next thing is to do with regs? With the vendor selection, that's fantastic to be able to like learn and leverage each other. But across a large financial institution, or I'm sure even a moderately sized one, like who is right? Right? I mean, in different products are going to interact with the laws differently, so you need both simplicity to be able to finish it, but you need complexity and granularity to get precision. And so you're always in this kind of dance between how broad you go and how precise you need.
Well, I think that takes us to the point that implementing regulatory change is really about governance in an organization. And that is one of the challenges that I think both of you are pointing to. So I think instantaneous implementation, there will never be such a thing, right? And the dysfunction that we often do see in organizations is because of that inability to implement standards or communicate standards or make sure that people are on the same page about how this will be done, right? And then you get into things like, the need for compliance committees or new product and services committees where you can bring the business line to the table, you can bring compliance and legal to the table, unless people are in the same room, it's just not going to happen. So I think that's kind of like the human element and the communication, will continue to drive the level of success.
And not only that, but also in the reverse, and we talked about this in the pre-session, making sure that the business understands that they can help themselves by bringing in the compliance team and the legal team early, rather than it's Friday, I'm launching the product Monday, you're good with this, right? You're comfortable with this? Oh, you're not? Well, that's a problem. But who's created the problem? You can't find a path forward on over Saturday, Sunday.
Yep. But the governance piece that you pointed out, Marina, is really key, because in that scenario, right, the RACI, who is responsible ultimately? Who has the decision? And with reg change, it's really important to have that strong partnership with legal and compliance, and with the business as well, because they do know the product. But understanding the environment that we're navigating and helping to think through the risks, you've got to have the right people at the table, but a clear understanding of what the expectations are for the outcomes.
I mean, I'm a firm believer in the 3 lines of defense model and implementing that into every policy that you write, so that roles and responsibilities are clear. But it is kind of important to get on the same page about that. All right. Well, with that, we're going to move on to interactions with our regulators and engagement. So, Inessa, I'd like to start with you again.
Sure. So we in the interesting space as a network. We are a regulated network, and we also viewed as a service provider. So the regulators come in and review our products and services that we offer to financial institution from that angle, and that's a very productive collaboration for us. In the process of that review, we provide overview of our products and services. They get thoroughly reviewed, and then any feedback provided help us to elevate our product. So that has been super productive. And additionally, during examination, sometimes we showcase our tech that we're using. And we have an excellent example of a vendor that was presented to a regulator that we rely on heavily. It was the vendor for us for reliance in KYC space, and they were very impressed with the offering that was provided, and so much so that the vendor was later invited to the regulators and presentation internally, and then really even further on, further was acquired by a very large entity. So without naming the vendor itself, it was extremely productive, not only for us to showcase in the vendor then going to the regulators liking it so much that they get a stamp of approval from that angle. And that collaboration and that discussions that we have with regulators are super productive in examinations. So if the regulator is informed, for example, and they understand the tech that you're using, and they're familiar with the tech, it makes it so much easier during the examination that you don't have to go through complex models and explain how everything is working. They already know, they're already familiar with that. So that's one of the examples and how MasterCard collaborating.
Yeah, the collaboration is the key. Prior to going to Wells, I was outside counsel for many years supporting large financial institutions, and it's just, you cannot say enough how important it is to be able to reach out, to ask the questions, to have the conversations. It can feel counterintuitive. It does, I'm sure at times, feel weird to be asking, but you're really asking for clarification and asking for understanding, and so that you know how to move. It's not going to work if we're trying to guess. This is not guess my head. I mean, that's just, the stakes are far too high. And so being able to, say, hey, this law appears to be outdated, or it doesn't make sense to me, and then being able to, get either a letter from a state's attorney general if you're dealing with state laws, or even a communication like, yeah, we know this is on the docket to be removed in 2025. The next time we have a session where we'll do rulemaking, that can make all the difference in the world in terms of whether or not you need to build a behemoth to address something small, or you can sort of right-size your implementation. But we've got to, that partnership, right? It doesn't start when a new law comes in. It's regular cadences. It's the regular interactions. It's really the routine that becomes the sublime.
Yeah, I totally agree, Brianna, and I also love your story, Inessa, about kind of the vendor who came in and was active in the regulatory discussions and all that. I mean, again, that's kind of what I do a lot. So engaging with engaging with regulators, helping them to understand these emerging technologies. So, for example, talking with the regulator recently about, how do you kind of manage compliance with whiteboards, right? There are these kind of, new emerging platforms like Mural and Miro and the whiteboard platforms in Teams and Zoom. They're kind of infinite. They're, anyone can participate in them. Anyone can share any type of data. So, we kind of talk to the regulator, inform them that yes, many customers and prospects do want to use these tools, and so we kind of gave them our view on how you can supervise these things and kind of demystify a little bit some of those technology hurdles that that they might not be aware of, or not be aware of kind of the usage kind of stats and all that. So it's really, I think, a benefit for kind of both sides, given this kind of like advocacy work that we do. The other thing that we do and try and be really active in is just providing regulatory comment, right? So, for example, the PRA and the FCA in the UK just did a call around the use of AI in financial services. We submitted a comment letter on that, and we've done that for FINRA requests for comment and Fed agency requests for comment and FSB. So I think just having someone who understands the space, can advocate indirectly on your behalf, can help to kind of again, like, demystify some of these issues, can be really helpful, I think, on both sides, because it helps us better understand the challenges that folks are having, and it helps the regulators then understand, like, what's the art of the possible and how are kind of more innovative folks thinking about some of these problems.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's really important that you have frequent enough interaction and engagement that you're speaking the same language. I remember a few years ago I was involved in a license application in a country, and we had not been engaged with that regulator much in the past. And the first few calls and meetings were not very productive. They were actually somewhat contentious because we were talking across each other and misunderstandings on both sides. And as we figured that out, then things worked much, much better. And it all turned out well in the end, but it was not, the way the sausage was made was not ideal. It would have been better if we'd maybe been involved and engaged with the regulator earlier in the process, gotten through that, getting to know how the language each other were using and what we were looking to do, before we had to get down to the nitty-gritty of, okay, what do we need to do to, how do we satisfy you that this license application should be approved?
So let me flip that a little bit on the other side. How do those interactions with your regulators help you in your strategic planning of your compliance initiatives? Anybody have thoughts about that? So clearly it's beneficial for the regulators to have a good idea of what you're doing, but are you able to anticipate, challenges or different changes to your program based on your conversations with the regulator?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, you may not be able to set your watch to it. It's kind of like audit. You can do a preview and they're not bound, but it's good to gut check. I think that gut check is really critical. And frankly, even if the information isn't, again, they're not bound by, yeah, this looks fine later, that doesn't mean we're not going to have an issue. You're building a relationship, and it goes both ways. So I would much rather ask for that up front and then be able to think through the considerations, because I think, in my experience, the regulators are not saying yes or no. They're saying, well, this is what is going to be important, or this is the thing that I want to see. I want to understand how you care for X. And that always makes it better, because I'd much rather hear that before we spend hundreds of millions of dollars than after.
We always know that the regulator is looking for anything new products and services. Where have compliance been present or not present, more importantly. So we try to be proactive in this space. If we're anticipating a product launch, or if we're anticipating a service offering, that we get there early, and a compliance and able to articulate decision-making, documentation. So that has been very important for us, because these are #1 conversations. And if you guys receive the letters from the regulator informing you of the visit, #1 question, what have changed? What have changed with products or services you've launched? That is number one component that we need to answer, and we typically really keeping track of that. We have a really robust framework in place that all of the elements come into play. Approvals are stamped, so it's some of that automated. So thankfully for RegTech, and all of the players come to the table and document the decision. So super and hyper focused in that space.
Yeah, I think it's interesting kind of from my seat to be able to see this evolve because, we're able to ask questions that sometimes firms, wouldn't want to ask or wouldn't want the answer to. And so kind of having that more open and blunt relationship with the regulators sometimes can be really, I think, eye-opening from my perspective. But it also helps to drive kind of what we're doing, right? So when we hear whether it's an affirmative response or a more equivocal response on a particular issue. Yeah, exactly. It helps inform everything. And I mean, I think, regulators want to engage more. They kind of are often seeking more feedback. And so I've found that it's been, really beneficial to kind of talk with them, try and keep that line of communication open because it is kind of symbiotic in that sense, at least how we see it. We will get calls from a regulator saying, hey, we're thinking about issue X, or how do you guys approach this particular issue? And it's nice to be able to kind of have that telephone line or Zoom line or whatever it is open.
Yeah, I think you're in a privileged space there.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
probably regulated institutions, if they throw out hypotheticals, they may be starting something that they may not want to hear the answers to.
Yeah.
Any comments on that, Ian?
Not really on that particular question. In my team, it's a product team, as we've so far over the last couple of years explored what we could do in terms of regulatory intelligence products to help customers understand and react to their compliance obligations, we have actually not needed to be directly engaged with regulators. Now, that may change at some point, but to date, it's not been necessary.
Okay, great. Well, then I'm going to go to you as the first person on the last question that we have. And this is really about evaluating technology and tools necessary to implement their regulatory management frameworks.
So broadly what we're looking at in terms of the types of technologies are how do you source, categorize, organize, annotate, structure the content in a way that will make sense to customers. Coming back to a comment earlier this morning, not all customers have the same taxonomy. They're probably very few of them have exactly the same taxonomy, and not even within a particular institution, maybe there's more than one taxonomy being used there. So there's some complexity there. Then there's, once you can deliver the content, the structured content, what technology do you use to enable efficient, effective workflow management, collaboration, and passage communication to the change management part of the process. And then you always need to have, where's your audit trail? Because as all of the compliance people, both within MasterCard and at customers that we've spoken to, pretty much all of them have said, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. That's how regulators look at it. So that, and you don't want to be trailing through tons of email accounts trying to find an email here, an email there. You want it all in one place so that you can just download it and it's done. That trolling through emails, the lack of workflow management, that's what makes the regulatory process painful for employees and very inefficient. I don't think anybody's going to complain that they don't have to go back and look through 9 months of their emails to find the 5 emails that are important for an audit trail for a particular regulatory change.
On the short-term question, we can help you with that. So, but I think like third-party vendor and vendor risk management has obviously become like such a huge issue, right? Any financial services organization is going to look to their vendors as critical service providers, regardless of kind of what type of service they're providing. So I think from our side, it's really just understanding that burden that banks have and being responsive to it, right? So we do a ton internally, whether it's our SOC 2 Type 2 audit, we map our controls to ISO 27001, and we map our controls to HIPAA, and we do an annual PCI audit. So doing all these things to help kind of expedite, give confidence to FIs that, hey, we kind of know what we're doing. We have folks who have been working in cloud technology for the last 20 or 25 years, and we can demonstrate that we're doing what we do by all these audits and things like TrueSight and the like. We just know that's important, and whether it's those types of things or other collateral that describes how we do BCP or privacy and security are just really important. So trying to just convey that expertise, get FIs comfortable, and acknowledging that there are these kind of multi-partite obligations that firms have, and difficult to audit that and oversee that, and trying to make that easier from our side is something we're always thinking about.
I think I would say I agree with how you laid that out was perfect. The sourcing, the collecting, the organizing, but I think the gap and the sort of what technology hopefully will soon be able to fill is the rationalization. And ideally, you'll need people to do that. So yay, lawyers, will have jobs for a while. But how do you make sense of the environment when it's going in different directions? And I think as a highly regulated financial institution, that's really challenging. How do you have to just make some risk-based decisions, and then how do you document your risk-based decisions, and how do you sort of care for that risk-based approach and then drive the consistency across time and across space and across product? And it's not an exact science, right? I mean, it really is a judgment piece, but I think the gap that I see, or if I had a wish list, is something to help do that. Because there's a lot of things that can help you find the laws, and then they can help you know when the law changed. And then we can horizon scan to see sort of what other things might have changed. But what do you do with that? What do you do with that? How do you navigate where laws are going in different directions? How do you navigate the federal state when preemption isn't something that you can leverage? How do you design a suite of controls to do that in a bouncing ball and a spinning wheel? So on Friday you get it, and then on Monday it all changes again, and you start all over again. But you're in a container ship. So it doesn't work, because you can't start over every way. You have to be going in a direction. So I think if there's a way to cull, or a way to apply, you could identify the risk lens more than just profiling, because it's got to be more granular than that, and to help navigate okay, now what do I do next? Or what are all the pieces? How do I map these changes to all the places they need to go? And how do I ensure that all the people who needed to get this got it? I think that's the piece that technology hasn't solved yet, and maybe someone in this room will call me after and say you have. I can't wait to hear.
I'm going to go back to know your technology. We spoke about it earlier, but evaluating your tech properly. So KYT, maybe it's a new term now. So also know limitations of your technology and being able to articulate it. Trust and verify component. I kind of spoke about it earlier. If you have the vendor that you've identified and the tech that you've identified, have you tested it, and are you periodically testing it, and you able to rely on it continuously? So this is something that's super important, and something that I see that breaks down continuously. So want to make sure that that's kind of the point the compliance officers take away from this session, that if you did find the tech that you love, and then that is the pure reliance for most of your controls, making sure that it works and continuously work. So stress test, and additionally, I think finding those vendors with whom you can collaborate and find the flexibility. It's really important to have these conversations and being able to make recommendations. We as users of the technology always find, okay, well, if this solution done X, it would have improved so much better. And if that type of interaction can happen between vendor and customer, and you guys, the vendors in the room, can take that and enhance your offering, and we actually helping you elevate the solution. And these type of collaboration is super important. I spoke about another example that we have in a company that we work with the vendor. It elevated their offering quite significantly, I would say, and as a result, the new version of the software that came out was basically included most of the limitation and changes that we've identified that have been solved, and those type of interactions are super important. So having a flexible vendor who's able to take in feedback and then internalize it and make changes, and it's not just off-the-shelf solution, this is it, we cannot make changes to it. If you can continuously drive change and work together, it's gonna be so much more efficient. And I'm gonna also mention that whatever, for compliance officers, whatever solution you select, make sure it's easy to use and intuitive. I think that's the key as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, back to the topic of, whether technology is going to replace people, don't underestimate the cost of implementing that new technology, right? And maybe having to go back to the drawing board once you've kind of have sunk costs, right, already, and I'm sure many people have experienced that. So just, that's part of the human capital calculation as well.
Yeah, I would say that kind of that human element is key, right? Because often there's this kind of misperception that buying a particular technology is going to solve everything. Yeah, it's magic.
We have those dreams.
Yeah, well, I like that dream. But I think like this notion of like the human in the loop of kind of oversight, right? That's what compliance is always super focused on. So, I think that's a super core part of any technology, right? Being able to audit, being able to demonstrate, hey, what happened when? How do we oversee things? Like we think about this a lot in the AI context, where we actually have like explainability kind of built into the product, so you can go and audit kind of the explainability of the models on a periodic basis. But that comment kind of comes up a lot. Well, is this going to replace us? And it's like, no, you're core to this. Like, someone needs to go and make a value judgment about X or Y as part of this whole platform. The technology's there just to kind of help you find that needle in the stack of needles.
Yeah, well, and I think the piece that I love that you said is really, as you build your process around the technology being a means to your end, allow room for iteration, right? Because you'll learn, the technology will learn, you are learning together. What can be challenging is if the technology is the end and it doesn't do what you need, then you're sort of stuck. So, but you need the time to iterate, because your first round won't get it. I lovingly refer to it as the first pancake. That first pancake is never right. It's always the wrong color, the pan was too hot, it wasn't hot enough, but that third pancake, that's a good pancake. So in your processes, just recognize the first pancake, it is what it is. But over time, if you've got the right partners and you can iterate and get to where you need to be, that's a better, and your vendor is flexible, you'll get a better outcome.
I love that example.
Or the pan overheats and the second batch burns.
I mean, that's a different problem.
That's usually my issue.
Operational risk.
Or how about technology creating new work, right? I mean, I can attest, my older daughter just started working in an FIU function, so she is reviewing suspicious activity alerts. That's generated by AI, right? That's generated by algorithms. So we have created additional jobs for people with technology. So I think there's like both aspects of it. We have about 6 minutes. We have a couple of questions from the audience. So I'm going to share those with our panel. So this is a question about regulatory trends we might expect to see in 2024. Any thoughts about that?
Everybody's talking about AI.
Yeah.
That's the first answer, and the most obvious one. The AI is going to be big.
Yeah, I think you're going to see more consumer protection. I think as interest rates stay high and people start to feel the rate environment that we're in, and the pain starts to land, whether or not we actually get to recession, I think you'll see states more actively trying to pass legislation to protect their consumers.
I think on a point that Ian, you mentioned earlier, cybersecurity for sure. So I think, just today, California released some of its draft requirements around cybersecurity audits for organizations. I don't see that going anywhere. Same with privacy, right? I don't think we'll see a
No federal privacy
I don't think we'll see a
legislation?
federal privacy law, but certainly, almost every state is kind of on a path to some level of privacy law at this point.
Okay. How about regulatory developments in other jurisdictions? Does anybody have a sense of that coming to the U.S. in the near future?
Well, something that we've seen is a lot of unsoiled requirements that may require you as an institution, as a global institution, adopting your policies. For example, many jurisdictions drop their beneficial ownership below 25%, 20, and we've seen 10% now as well. So you have to think through how you're going to calibrate your solutions and how flexible you are with your solutions if you have offerings and if you have clients in those markets. So that's something that's top of mind for many folks in the AML space. There's so many requirements that around privacy and about access of data. In Europe, ton of evolving, not just the country, but holistically, so many evolving laws in the pipeline. We'll see how those that will develop in the future.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in quickly. I think it's interesting that you mentioned that about privacy because on the one hand, we have GDPR, right? We have a lot of other countries, enacting this type of frameworks. At the same time, there are these transparency laws. And these transparency laws are having institutions reach out and ask for private information. So they're really at odds with each other and at odds in a compliance framework. And I mean, we get it a little as the intersection with AML and privacy as well, because obviously due diligence into individuals, is to some extent encroaching on privacy. But this is really interesting, and I think it takes some compliance and legal expertise to figure out how to comply with laws that seem to contradict each other.
Exactly.
I guess just one other thing, Inessa mentioned some of the changes in some of the AML regulations. And comes back to something that was mentioned in an earlier session about keeping assessments fresh. As those regulations change in one direction or another in different countries, the bad actors are going to look at the relative attractiveness of where they may want to operate out of, which is going to mean that the assessments of risk of different parties you may be engaged with is going to need to be constantly updated and refreshed, because the bad actors will figure it out really fast if there's an opportunity, a relative opportunity opens up somewhere.
I would say two things touch on. The first would be increased kind of oversight expectations around senior managers. So the senior manager regime in the UK under the FCA rules, we've seen in these kind of $2.5 billion in fines around messaging supervision, there have been senior managers at firms who have been caught up in that, and I think that the U.S. is starting to import some of that kind of perspective around how senior managers need to operate. And then the other was actually kind of a point that you made around kind of consumer protection. So like consumer duty in the UK, the new UK cryptocurrency rules around marketing. It seemed like other jurisdictions are becoming more evolved around some of those issues. So I would not be surprised at all to see that here.
Yeah, I was going to say crypto, but from that perspective, the data access as well. I expect to see more of that coming this way.
Okay, last question. We have a minute left. Is more digitized compliance the answer to help deal with increased cost in compliance? This takes us back a little bit to our first conversation. What do you think?
I don't think so, because I think that rationalization piece is still going to be there. You can digitize it, but you still need to make it make sense, and you just that creates different issues to be addressed. You get some efficiencies, but you lose some as well.
I'm on the other side of the coin. I think we're saying the same thing.
That's a surprise.
But I would say yes, acknowledging that there are all these kind of human critical oversight kind of aspects to technology. But I do think there is force multiplier there to help.
All right. With that, we're going to close out our panel. Thank you very much for being a terrific audience. Look forward to seeing you at drinks.